First came the earthquake.
Within a minute of the earthquakes starting to occur, they would have started to experience violent shaking. Some of the instruments in the very sophisticated network in Japan show that these accelerations reached 2 and at a maximum 3G. So, at 1G, anything over 1G, your feet don't stay on the floor, you're airborne. They were shaken very violently for a good 3 to 6 minutes. Some buildings start to collapse. You'd see large structures that would start to sway around. Some people see the ground rolling. It's like the solid ground is rolling like waves at the beach.
Then came the waves.
The earthquake happens off the coast of Sendai on Friday afternoon about 2:45. The tsunami appears some 20 minutes later, something like that, depending on where you are.
From the time the earthquake started until the arrival of the tsunami, you've probably got about 20 minutes, and you've already lost about 10 of them just through the shaking and trying to negotiate your way out of the building. That's what I would estimate. So you've got about 10 minutes now, and you've got in many cases, I think, these people had a long way to go.
The Meteorological Agency has issued a tsunami warning for Japan's Pacific coast. People near the coast should evacuate immediately to higher ground.
Many of those living along Japan's northeastern coastline didn't make it to higher ground.
Everyone would have experienced waves at the beach, a big wave might be 2 meters, it might knock you around for about 10 minutes and then retreat. This wave is 10 meters high, and it comes and it keeps coming and coming for 10 minutes. That's 600 seconds, 600 very long seconds.
In the space of 10 fatal minutes, thousands of men, women and children were swept away to their deaths.
People are just dispersed over many, many kilometers, and they're stuck in these massive debris fields. They're just totally inaccessible. There's not going to be anyone around to hear them, and rescuers can't get to them, even if they knew where they were.
Thousands had lost their lives, and 500,000 Japanese had lost their homes. The scale of this double disaster was beyond comprehension. But it wasn't just a double disaster. Less than 2 hours after the earthquake shook Japan and the tsunami flooded its coastline, the Tokyo Electric Power Company announced that 4 million households were now without power. On Japan's northeastern coast, the Fukushima Daiichi power station felt the full force of the earthquake, and its nuclear reactors automatically shut down.
Regarding our nuclear power facilities, some of the nuclear power plants have stopped automatically, but so far, no radioactive material or radiation has been confirmed to have been leaked to the outside. We will secure the safety of the people of Japan.
At Fukushima, what we have are 6 reactors. 3 of them had already been turned down, but 3 of them were operating. And immediately, because of that earthquake on the first day, the 3 that were operating immediately auto-shut down.
They'd all shut down safely with a massive earthquake, which I think is a tribute to the way that the earthquake protection had been designed and operated. All the reactors shut down, all the control rods inserted. So at that stage, it was very good.
But then came the tsunami, breaching the seawall, protecting the power station and flooding the standby diesel generators. Tony Owen is a former power station manager with 30 years' experience operating nuclear reactors in the UK. Why did those generators fail?
They got flooded in the tsunami. It looks as if the station was designed to cope. You know, the station has a seawall, it's a coastal station. It has a substantial seawall, but it wasn't built high enough to cope with the level of tsunami they experienced. So that once it covered the seawall, then it would have covered the cooling water pump house, the diesels, the main switchboard, a lot of essential equipment.
Within an hour, we have the massive tsunami that strikes. And what this does is it takes out all of the backup electrical generation. And this is incredibly important because when you have a nuclear reactor with irradiated nuclear fuel spent rods in a pond, both of those things must have active cooling. So we need electricity to run the pumps that get the water into both the reactors and the cooling ponds. So in a sense, we begin minute 1 with the earthquake, but we begin minute 2, in a sense, with the tsunami taking out the backup power. And at this point, within as little as a day, we begin to have serious buildup of heat and gas in these 3 reactors that had been operating.
"24 hours after the earthquake struck Japan, the roof blew off Unit 1 at the Fukushima Daiichi power station. It was the first in a series of explosions at the plant. The images were shocking and unprecedented.
The explosion of the outer building, which is not designed as a containment barrier, but nevertheless is a very solid structure with very thick concrete walls, appears to be associated with a high-pressure build-up of hydrogen gas that arises from the breakup of water molecules and water vapour. And I think that process is understood. But there's never been an incident that I'm aware of that the pressure has built up to such a point where it has detonated.
The water inside of that reactor core begins to drop because the pump isn't running, pumping new water to cool it in. The water begins to become steam, superheated. And now what happens is that water level starts dropping. As it drops, what you begin to have is the buildup of hydrogen from the melting of the fuel elements. And this is an incredible thing right there, because as these fuel elements have melted in these 3 reactors, that's what we call a meltdown scenario. That is the beginning of a meltdown. But what it also does is it builds up hydrogen gas, which is hugely explosive. And that in turn leads at first to one reactor, which gives off enough gas that there's an explosion, and that blows the top off of the reactor building.
Radiation was now leaking from the plant.
The radiation level rose to 21 microsievert temporarily.
Something had to be done to keep the reactors cool. As a last-ditch measure, the decision was taken to pump seawater in to cool them down. If you were the manager of the plant and you were giving the order for seawater to be pumped in to cool the reactors, what would be going through your mind?
I've just written off the plant. So, I mean, in a way, this is a 40-year-old reactor. It was due to shut down very shortly, if not this year. But it'll give them all sorts of problems because they've now got seawater inside the reactor, which will start to cause corrosion problems.
Once you begin to put seawater in a reactor, That reactor is no longer a nuclear reactor, it's a piece of nuclear garbage. That reactor will never operate ever again. But the reason for that is that the salt water now in the reactor is corrosive and begins to eat away the steel from the reactor. Again, a terrible decision to make. Do we allow the reactor to heat up and potentially explode, or do we start pumping seawater into the reactor even though it destroys it as a reactor?
As workers at the Fukushima plant battled to control the reactors, the Japanese Red Cross traveled 200 kilometers north. The scene that greeted them was one of utter devastation. Three days after the earthquake that shook Japan came the second explosion at Fukushima Daiichi power plant, this time in Unit 3. The next day came a third explosion, this time in Unit 2.
The explosion appears not to have compromised the course of the buildings in which they occurred. So that's a good thing. But it's all relative. The explosions were unanticipated, they are without precedent, and they reveal that the circumstances at Fukushima in particular are rather desperate.
This is the primary container, is that right?
Yes, so there's a very thick primary containment surrounding the reactor vessel itself, about 15 centimetres strong. At the bottom of that is this suppression pool, which is a toroid of water. This shows better the reactor vessel inside the primary containment and the toroid suppression chamber at the bottom. It also shows the secondary containment, which is a secondary containment building, a ventilated building, but this is a fairly lightweight top on it, and this is the part that was blown off in the explosion.
Several workers were injured in the explosions, and others exposed to large doses of radiation.
The major challenges are the staff in this sort of situation and managing dose rates. So when the staff go out to do operations, they'll carry a rate meter with them, which tells them the dose rate at that time, and it's also got an integrated feature which will tell them the total dose they're receiving. So there's limits on dose that you want to do. There's also the possibility in this sort of accident of airborne contamination. So they would normally go in a plastic suit with breathing apparatus to enter the sort of reactor areas.
How big a protection are the protective suits that they wear?
The protective suits are no protection against the gamma radiation, which is giving them the dose. The protective suits will protect them from fallout landing on their suit, and it's mainly to stop the beta radiation, which would cause huge skin doses in the case of it being deposited on the skin and staying there for a period of time. But the protective suits and obviously the respiratory equipment is to stop you inhaling the material. They don't provide any restriction of the gamma radiation dose.
On Tuesday and Wednesday last week, following the third explosion at Unit 2 and 2 fires at Unit 4, extremely high levels of radiation were recorded at the plant.